Okay, so today's part 3, and this is going to be on your chemical health. So primarily what we're talking about here is nutrition, foods, things that obviously keep you healthy, and other things we can do to stay healthy as we go through this 2020 survival course. So again, this is a third part of this survival style course for 2020. We're going to be talking a lot about food, nutrition, energy, and things like that, and how you can most effectively maximize what you're doing. Okay, so what I like to talk about is what's called decoding your diet. So we'll break down some things, why you eat, how much we should be eating in terms of portion sizing, when we should eat, and what we should eat. Obviously, food serves many purposes, from nutritional to enjoyment to comfort foods. We want to make sure that the foods that you're eating are boosting your system as much as possible, again, in a survival type mode. So a lot of what we'll talk about is portion sizing, what are the best things to look at for maintaining your weight, because we know that weight gain and obesity are big risk factors for COVID and a lot of other illnesses. So we're trying to do things and structure nutrition so that we're limiting other possible problems that could arise that could create more issues in your body. So again, why we eat, obviously for nutritional purposes, enjoyment, socialization are big when it comes to eating. How much, again, is going to be quantities of eating. We'll talk more about that in terms of what size portions you should be having based on your body weight. I like to use a hand scale instead of actually measuring things specifically. When we should eat is basically a timing. So how often we should be eating, and there's many different approaches to this, and not one fits each person. So it's kind of decoding what you're doing and trying to understand how you can do it better. So it's just minor modifications. And then what we should eat is probably the biggest point. Obviously there's a lot of nutritional programs out there. There's a new diet book that comes out every day. Whether you're an omnivore, vegan, meat eater, vegetarian, there's so many different sects of nutritional approaches these days. So we'll kind of break them down a bit as we go along. Okay, so this here we're going to be talking about quantity of food. So we'll look at portion sizing. What is a specific portion of macronutrients, which we're going to talk about in a minute, macronutrients versus micronutrients. But what is a proper portion sizing for you? And that's going to really depend on a system that I like to use, which is basically using your hand to measure out portions. Instead of weighing things, you don't need to get into all that as much. It's just basically guesstimating using your hands as your measuring tool. So we're going to talk about macro counting, which are basically going to be proteins, carbs, fats, and water. The big things that are going to be measured in terms of grams. Micro nutrients are going to be more vitamins and minerals, which we'll talk about as well. But primarily macro counting, and then calories. Our entire nutrition system in the U.S. is based on calories. There are pros and cons to that. We're going to talk about what each macronutrient is and how much you should be taking in, but also about the energy components associated with that. But portion sizing is very important. So this general, there'll be a handout which is going to show this in more detail. I just want to discuss how it works. But basically, a portion of protein is about the thickness and size of the palm of your hand. So if you're eating fish or chicken or any type of protein serving, should be about the thickness and size of your hand. In terms of vegetables, when we look at something that's fibrous, like broccoli or beans or something like that, it's basically going to be a cupped hand, like this, or actually open hand for them. For something that's more starchy, like rice or pasta, it's going to be a cupped hand. So fibrous carbs are going to be an open hand. Starchy carbs are going to be one cupped hand. So if you look at the average serving of rice or pasta that most people are having, it's way more than a cupped hand. That's really a serving. So if you go to a restaurant where they kind of serve you rice in a little shaped dome, that technically is the average serving size for most people. Unless you're very large or very small, that's kind of average. When you're looking at fats, okay, so things like oils and nuts and things like that, it's basically either a small circle in the palm of your hand or about the size of your thumb. So not a ton, but the important thing is not to really be worried as much about healthy dietary fats, which we'll get into. Even though they're higher in calories, it's really about what do they do for your body, because they're not used in the same way as the other macronutrients. In terms of something like soup, soup is 2 cupped hands, a salad is 2 open hands. So that's an average portion size for your own body type. So if you're very large, you're going to have larger portions. If you're very small, smaller portions, and that's just an easy way to kind of relate your portion sizing for meals. That doesn't apply to snacks, which I do recommend using. It's more just for a breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So that's kind of what we're going to start working with. When we look at calories, we're looking at caloric energy balance. So if you look over here, weight gain is when you're basically taking in more calories than you're burning. Okay, so it's shifting the scale. That is considered a positive caloric balance. So positive meaning you're taking in more than you're burning. So you have a surplus of energy. Your body's going to store that in fat cells, and you're going to hold on to that. Tapping into that later is another story. But when you're actually eating, this is looking at what you're eating and your caloric balance for the day. So a negative or a positive energy balance is going to equal weight gain. You're going to have a surplus. If you're balanced, which means you're basically eating roughly about the same amount of calories and burning about the same amount, you're stabilized. So if you're at an ideal weight and you're happy with where you're at, stabilizing and having a balanced approach is ideal. On the other hand here, when we look at weight loss is going to be what's called a negative energy balance, meaning that you're burning more than you're taking in. So you actually have a deficit. So your body's actually tapping into what you've stored away at a previous time. So typically, if you're in a weight gain mode, you've actually gained the weight, your body stored it. As you shift over here to a negative caloric balance, you're actually burning off what your body has stored away. Now this is ideal for obviously weight loss. This is going to be for maintaining, and this is how most people are going to be gaining weight. So to look at these in terms of energy, it's all about calories. You want to actually try to become what's called fuel inefficient, which is going to be this model here, which means that you're burning a lot of calories 24/7. Okay, so it's a Hummer versus a hybrid. Hummer sucks up a lot of gas, not very good on gas, where a hybrid is very efficient. In order to lose weight, you want to be more like a Hummer, where you're burning a lot of fuel. Okay, when you're burning a lot of fuel, you're tapping into what you've stored away from previous meals, and that is the ideal way to lose weight. And again, this survival course for 2020, it's trying to limit the obesity factor when it comes to your general health, because if you have any type of illness, if you have obesity, that's an extenuating factor that can cause all different types of other problems, and it puts stress on your body, which you don't need because you already have that from whatever illness you're battling. Okay, so timing, when to eat. Now there's a couple different systems of eating. Obviously you have 3 meals a day, 3 meals, 3 snacks, or 2 snacks, 2 meals a day, 1 meal a day. A big common thing right now is intermittent fasting. Grazing is basically eating small meals throughout the day. I'm going to break these down as we go along. Skipping meals is one of the main things to look at when it comes to when we eat. If you skip any meal, you're destined to overeat at your next meal. Meaning, if you're skipping that section of time where you didn't get any nutrition, you're going to make that up somewhere in the day. So if you try to say, okay, I'm going to have 2 meals, those meals might be very large. Or if you do 1 meal, you might just be starving and just trying to eat as much as you can at that 1 meal, which is going to be tons of calories, and your body's going to try and hold on to that because it thinks that you're starving. Now, intermittent fasting is a very popular thing to do right now, and it's basically going for long periods of time, trying to make your body focus on burning fat for energy, trying to stabilize blood sugar. The main thing I would say about intermittent fasting is to really work with your doctor and or a dietitian, because there's a lot of ins and outs of these programs that people don't think about. If you're a diabetic, I definitely would not recommend that, because your unstable blood sugar could create a lot of other problems associated with that. Also, if you don't have a constant flow of glucose, if you're hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic, that could be an issue. So there is some weight loss with these types of programs, but it has to be healthy weight loss. You can't go on a diet, a time-sensitive diet, and expect to continue that for the rest of your life. There are certain components of fasting that do work very well for detoxification, things like that. But for the most part, you want to work with something you can consistently do throughout your life, not a short-term diet to lose weight for this and then you gain the weight back. You don't want to have these yo-yo or roller coaster type diets that fluctuate your weight up and down. It's not what your body wants to do, and it's very difficult to break those cycles. So in general, the average person is probably eating 3 meals. Many people do skip breakfast because they're in a rush in the morning. Probably now because there's much more home-based offices. People are probably eating more breakfast, or they're preparing things at home. They don't have to run out of the house. But the 3 meal and 3 snacks or 2 snacks is very popular because it's spacing your nutrition out. So you're not front loading all your nutrition in the morning, your high calories in the morning, and then less at night. Or vice versa, eating very little in the morning and a lot at night. It really depends on your work schedule. If you're working at night or you're doing something active, you're going to need more calories for that activity. Now, 2 meals or 1 meal is going to be very difficult for your body to process because it's a short-term feeding, and you're not getting that constant flow of nutrients, so your body has to kind of adjust and adapt to that. And it is difficult because, again, that's where your body is going to think you're starving, and it's going to focus more on retaining as much as possible. Grazing is basically just small meals throughout the day. You're not really sitting and having any large meals. Sometimes like the 3 meal, 3 snacks is kind of a grazing. Those meals are going to be smaller and or similar size to a snack. But again, don't skip meals because it's not about mental control and things like that. You can't stop eating. It's if you skipped a meal, your body's going to want to replace it with something else. And a lot of times those are going to be comfort foods, which are not the best for you. Now, what to eat is a very difficult thing to talk about with a lot of people these days because they're very opinionated about what they eat. There's a lot of ethical and personal decisions that come into this. Obviously, a lot of food allergies and processing of foods is a big thing. But the average person should be an omnivore, whether you're having more plants, less animals, more animals, less plants. It's a personal choice. Some people do very well on low-carb diets. Other people cannot stand them at all. So it really depends on how your body adapts to things. You know your body the best, so making the right choices for your health is very important. One big thing I want to mention here is a no sugar, or low sugar, low carb diets, especially avoiding fast carbohydrates that have a high glycemic index is very important. It's going to help with your blood sugar, any issues with that, instability, heart issues. A lot of what we look at when it comes to nutrition is trying to control the amount of sugar we take in. Now, all carbohydrates break down into glucose, which is blood sugar, but they break down in different rates. So that's something we'll talk about a bit here. It's basically, I consider an easy way to categorize them, aside from the glycemic index, are fast and slow carbs. Fast carbs break down very fast from a carbohydrate into a sugar. Slow carbs take a longer duration to get to that point, so it allows your body to handle that sugar more effectively. But again, it is a personal choice, and there are ethical things that go into how our food is produced. So when we look at macronutrients, there's actually 3 that are considered macros. I always like to add water in as the 4th because we need to have that in substantial amounts because 60% of our body is actually water. So first of all, let's look at protein. Okay, protein is a structural component, as well as fats. So protein and fats form a matrix of every cell in your body. Cell walls are made of protein and fat. So protein is almost like a building block, like a cinder block, and basically fats are going to be almost like mortar. Okay, so they kind of work together to form a structural component. Now, carbohydrates are straight out energy. Okay, so if you don't use them, you actually store them in fat cells, and we have to tap into them later. So it's basically like taking that fuel. If you don't use it, you're going to be able to store it away. Whereas the others, protein and fat, are not really used as fuel. We can use them as fuel. Our bodies can convert them into carbohydrates, such as a very low-calorie, zero-carb diet. Our body's going to take those other 2 macronutrients and turn them into energy. But for the most part, our body doesn't like to use them primarily because they're more structural components. So the main thing when we look at controlling the 3 macronutrients, the one I like to have people focus on the most is carbohydrate intake. Carbs are going to be bread, pasta, rice, cereal, cookies, crackers, chips, fruits, vegetables, juices. There's such a huge array of carbohydrates, and most of them don't need to be refrigerated or cooked, and they're very simple and easy to get. Most fast foods are going to be very heavy in carbohydrates, which is going to affect your blood sugar, it's going to affect your weight, it's going to affect so many factors, your energy levels, your emotions. So controlling carbohydrates is very, very important. Protein, we'll start off with, is 4 calories per gram. Again, if we're looking at that in terms of energy, but your body wants to use that for rebuilding things. Your hormones are also built on proteins and fats, so it's used for many different components. Now, proteins are basically a long chain of amino acids. So it's almost like a pearl necklace. So when you eat that, you're actually cutting the string in between those pearls, and then you have this free-floating amino acids. And your body takes them and sets them up in a certain sequence based on the protein your body wants to synthesize. Now, if you look at the different amino acids, there are 20 total amino acids. 9 of them are essential, meaning you have to actually eat them. The others your body can actually synthesize and make from other components. The other category we look at when it comes to proteins is you have complete proteins, incomplete, and complementary. So a complete protein is going to have all 9 essential amino acids, so you don't have to combine different foods. Whereas an incomplete protein does not have all 9 essential amino acids, meaning that you have to have 2 different foods with complementary amino acids to complete that, to make it a complete protein. Those 2 would be called complementary. So you have a complete protein that has all 9 essential, you have an incomplete that doesn't have all 9, maybe has 4 or 5, and you have another food that has the other complementing numbers. So those 2 would form a complementary protein. Very important nowadays when it comes to plant-based diets and vegan diets and vegetarians, you need to make sure you balance them off, otherwise you become protein deficient. So because those diets are not heavily laden in dairy and animal products, which are typically going to be complete proteins, when you're combining other non-animal based proteins, you need to make sure that they complete each other. So a lot of the modern day protein powders and supplements are using pea protein powder and like rice protein. They combine them together as complementary proteins. Even by themselves, they're not really considered protein, they're more carbohydrates, but together they have the complementary amino acids to be considered complete. All right, so carbohydrates, this is the key here, is that yes, they are 4 calories per gram. Now that's units of energy. You basically have simple carbohydrates, you have complex, and you have fibrous. Okay, so fiber is another component you're going to be getting from carbohydrates if you're eating, let's say, a lot of vegetables. You're going to get a lot of fiber from the cell walls. If you're eating grains, if you're having whole grain, you're going to be getting fiber from that. Fiber is very important for many functions in your body. It actually detoxifies and cleanses your intestinal tract. There's a lot of things with controlling blood sugar when it comes to fiber. It slows things down so you don't have this massive rush of sugar. But basically, again, it's energy. Okay, so energy, we either use it or store it. So it's very easy to store carbohydrates in the form of fat and fat cells to be later used, and that's the whole component as we get into exercise and how we can use that. But your body is very efficient at storing carbohydrates. Okay, so we don't really have any feast or famine anymore, but our bodies still work on that. So when we're feasting, our body's holding on to as much as it can, and then if there was a famine, which unfortunately doesn't really happen in this country, we pretty much never have that feast or famine approach anymore, is that we basically never get to tap into that. So our bodies are very efficient at holding on to excess in case we need it. In case we're, don't have access to food for a while, we can actually tap into that, but most of the time we don't have that issue. So again, when I talk about rating system for carbohydrates, I look at glycemic index. So you have slow carbs and you have fast carbs. So slow carbs are going to be glycemic index, let's say 40 or 50 or below. Fast carbs are going to be, 50 to 60 and above, all the way up to, basically straight sugar. Or white bread is going to be basically straight sugar. So those things are very important to look at when it comes to controlling your blood sugar. Carbohydrates, some people are very sensitive to carbohydrates. A lot of people have issues controlling their carb intake because they are a comfort food and they're very cheap and easy to get. So controlling your carbohydrate intake is very important. When it comes to fats, a lot of people unfortunately associate dietary fat with body fat because it's higher in calories, it's 9 calories per gram. But what we want to look at here is healthy fats. So again, fats are not really used as much, dietary fats, for energy, okay? They're mostly used as a structural component of, again, your hormones, your cells, things like that, as a matrix with protein. But when we look at healthy fats, these are primarily unsaturated fats. There's polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats. It's going to primarily be nuts, seeds, nut butters, olive oil, avocado, coconut oil, things like that. Those are all healthy fats. And there's been a big increase in the amount of healthy fats in our diet. Subway has obviously tons of avocado, and there's all these new foods that have a lot of these healthy fats. And for the longest time, the sugar industry or carbohydrate industry was saying that fats are bad and they're going to create all these problems, but really it was sugar. Sugar was the bigger problem. So now, since that research has more modernly come out to say that it's not the problem, it's really increased the amount of healthy fats in our diet. Now there are unhealthy fats, and typically those are going to be hydrogenated fats, trans fats, fried foods that turn into grease. Those things are really going to create problems in your body because we don't process them well. The other big thing with healthy fats is they help with portion control to reduce overeating, meaning when you have fat in your meal, okay, healthy fat especially, you're going to feel fuller longer. If you eat something, let's say there's no fat, like for decades there was these no fat or low fat diets, you weren't eating those calories because you weren't eating the fats, but you were constantly hungry. So you're replacing that amount of energy you would have taken in with fats with other carbs. So it drastically increased the amount of carbohydrates people are eating, which negatively affects, again, your blood sugar. Your cholesterol is regulated by that. Your heart disease. There's so many things that are negatively affected by excessive consumption of carbohydrates. So the fourth, again, this one typically is not considered a macronutrient. I always like to include it because it's something that, there are no calories in water, right? It's 0 calories, but it's pretty much the only 0-calorie food that makes sense to eat. Diet foods have no calories, have all these different chemicals and negative side effects. Water is essential to life. Okay, so you can only survive a max 3 to 4 days without water, or you can survive up to 3 weeks without food. So water is essential. Now, obviously, we I think drink more water these days because it's more readily available. There's more bottled water. It's actually more expensive than gasoline if you think about it, based on a small bottle of water versus the price of a gallon of gas. Water is much more expensive, but it is essential to health. So having the right amount of water is going to change, right? If you're sweating a lot, or if you're in a very humid environment or a dry environment, you're going to increase the amount of water you need to take in. Now, another thing to look at is going into winter, which relates to health and your immune system, is that we actually need more water in the winter because things are very dry, right? Our skin dries out, our mucus linings in our nose and whatnot dry out because there's no humidity, right? All the humidity is frozen. So that's one thing, especially here in Western New York, you need to always focus on drinking more water in the winter than you do in the summer. In the summer, we're perspiring and sweating, but you're probably going to drink water pretty consistently when you're thirsty. Whereas in the winter, you're not thinking about this because it's so dry. You're going to feel it, you're going to see it and feel it more in your skin, and you're not going to recognize as much that you have to drink water. So obviously people drinking a lot of coffees and teas and things like that. Coffee will actually dehydrate you a bit, so it is important to increase your water intake if you do drink a lot of coffee. Typically 1 cup of coffee, because of the caffeine and whatnot, you're going to need probably 4 to 5 glasses of water to offset that. So that's one thing to take into account when it comes to hydration and water. All right, so micronutrients, I'm a huge fan of using vitamin therapy to basically boost your immune system, especially we'll get into a detailed section on that. But basically we break them down into water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, so basically B's and C's are going to be your primary water-soluble vitamins. Those are things your body cannot store, so you need more of a constant supply of those things. You're going to get a decent amount of vitamins and minerals from your food if you're eating a pretty balanced diet, but there are certain things that you want to enhance or increase the amount of, so when your body needs it, it's there. So I'm a big fan of using vitamins, not a ton of vitamins, but very specific ones that work very well to not only maintain your health, but boost your immune system toward any potential disease, coming about. So fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K can be stored in fat cells, so you actually can get a buildup of those. We'll talk about D3 in one of the next presentations, which is important for building up your immune system, but pretty much the other fat-soluble vitamins you're getting enough of through your diet, as long as you have a balanced diet. Calcium, magnesium are also very important things. Magnesium especially, because the American diet is very deficient in magnesium. Magnesium plays a large role in bone density and also in immune health. So that is one thing that I talk about in one of the next presentations about boosting your immune system. Fats would be another thing to look at supplementing using omega-3s. Flax oil, fish oil, borage seed oil, things like that are very important. Coconut oil, because those things actually are natural anti-inflammatories. So we get a lot of inflammation from everyday life. Those things help to suppress that inflammation. Now, the main thing I would like to talk about is the quality and cost of vitamins. You can have something very, let's say vitamin C. Vitamin C pretty much across the board is the same thing. Some of it's buffered vitamin C, but vitamin C is very cheap, but very, very effective for many different things, not just for colds and things like that. For your skin, allergies, there's immense amounts of benefits for vitamin C. So when we look at things like that, there are really only 4 big companies that make the raw materials that all vitamin companies buy from. They make their own proprietary blend of these vitamins, but primarily you don't want to spend a ton of money on vitamins. There are certain things like fish oil. That is one thing you want to get a little bit higher grade because they're doing a lot more filtration of the fish oil. Because if you're using fish that are coming from the ocean that have lots of PCBs and toxins in them, those filtrations increase the cost, but it's reducing the amount of that stuff that's getting in your system. So that is one thing I do recommend buying higher quality. Now the next thing we talk about is your microbiome. So your microbiome is basically all the symbiotic bacteria and whatnot that work with our body. Okay, so those cells or those organisms outnumber our own cells 10 to 1. So technically we're actually more of this kind of community of microbes than we are our own cells, but they work with us. Mitochondria, which produce energy in our bodies, in every cell, are technically, they're extracellular organisms. But we would not be alive if we didn't, at this level, without having them. So it's very important to support them. Now, one thing we talk about with the microbiome is gut health. So you have what are called prebiotics and probiotics. These are obviously a big thing these days with intestinal health, mental health. It plays a role in everything, especially when we talk about your gut and your immune system. A lot of it actually is in your digestive tract. So prebiotics are going to be fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, things that are basically fibers and nutrients that actually feed this bacteria. And then probiotics are actually the bacteria themselves, which will proliferate if given the right amount of food and nutrients. So yogurts, kombucha is a huge thing. I mean, you can buy kombucha now, which is fermented tea, in gas stations. It's pretty much everywhere. But these things are very good because they have a lot of enzymes, good bacteria that actually help our bodies to feed that colony. You can use supplements as well for probiotics. I would recommend using the ones that are refrigerated because they're kind of put to sleep a bit and they're not as productive, and then once they hit your digestive tract they kind of reactivate. But basically these are symbiotic bacteria and microorganisms that work with our body to produce optimal health. We've obviously gotten away from a lot of these antibiotics and things which were killing the good and the bad bacteria. So now a lot of doctors are kind of more hesitant on using very powerful antibiotics to work on correcting illnesses. Supply staples, obviously right now it's an important time to make sure we're stocked up on the proper things. Canned goods obviously last a very long time. Beans, soups, tuna fish, dry goods, make sure you're having a whole supply of those things. They're very inexpensive and cheap. Eggs, dairy, pasta sauce, things you can make, large amounts of meals with. And frozen goods, especially when it comes to obviously shifting into winter, buying frozen produce, fruits and vegetables will last a lot longer. Obviously in the summer we're buying fresh things, but they go bad pretty quick. So by using frozen, you're actually prolonging the shelf life of these things so you can use them. Plus, they're typically not as expensive. Bottled waters, obviously cleaners, toilet paper is obviously a big thing this year, and bleach. So these are things to look at in terms of supplies to make sure you have on hand so you can make the best choices possible. So part 3 of the summary is basically looking at decoding your diet, what you're doing, and again, everyone's going to be different, but why you eat this, what you're eating, when you're eating, how much you're eating, portion sizing, looking at macronutrients versus micronutrients, and supporting your microbiome with different foods that actually work with your body. So those are very key components to the chemical side of your health, which is very important in fending off illness and increasing well-being and longevity. So the next presentation will build on this, and we'll go to the next slide right after this.